When I married Carol, I knew I was not walking into an empty house. Her sons were already grown. Tyler was 24. Owen was 21. They had their own jobs, their own apartments, their own opinions about the man their mother had chosen. I never asked them to call me Dad. I never tried to erase their biological father or compete with a memory that belonged to them. I only tried to help. At first, the request seemed reasonable. Tyler fell behind on his electric bill after losing a week of work. I paid it. Owen's transmission failed, and without his car he could not get to his job. I covered the repair. Then came the credit cards, the rent, the insurance, the emergency transfers sent late at night after one of them had spent his paycheck on restaurants, electronics, or weekends he could not afford. Every time, Carol would stand beside me with worried eyes. "They're still figuring life out," she would say. So I rescued them. Again. And again. I told myself that family meant helping people until they learned to stand on their own. I believed one day they would look back and understand what I had done. Not worship me. Not call me their father. Just understand. But gratitude is a fragile thing when help becomes predictable. Soon they stopped asking with embarrassment. They started asking with expectation. Tyler would text me an amount without even explaining what it was for. Owen once called while laughing with friends in the background and asked whether I could move a few hundred into his account before midnight. I became less of a person and more of an emergency service. A wallet with a pulse. The argument that ended it began over something small. Tyler needed money for rent because he had spent nearly half his paycheck on a weekend trip. Owen wanted me to cover his car insurance after buying a television large enough to cover an entire wall. For the first time, I questioned them. I asked why their mistakes always became my responsibility. Tyler smirked. Owen laughed. Then Tyler leaned back in his chair and said, "You act like we'd fall apart without you." Owen looked at his brother and added, "We don't need you. We'll be just fine without you." Carol was in the room. She said nothing. That silence hurt more than their laughter. I looked at both of them and nodded. "All right," I said. They expected shouting. They expected threats. They expected me to cool down and send the money 3 days later. I did none of those things. I simply believed them. The following week, Tyler called because his landlord had posted a late notice on his door. He needed $1,200 by Friday. I refused. An hour later, Owen asked me to pay his insurance before the policy was cancelled. I refused him too. They thought I was bluffing. I was not. Tyler called me selfish. Owen accused me of punishing them because they had hurt my pride. Carol asked me to reconsider, just this once. But, just this once, had lasted for years. I told them the same thing each time. "You said you didn't need me. I'm respecting your decision." Reality reached them faster than any lecture ever had. Tyler picked up night shifts at a warehouse. He sold the gaming system I had helped him buy and canceled a trip with his friends. Owen sold the television, stopped eating out, and began doing weekend delivery work to keep his insurance active. For the first time, they learned the price of their own choices. They hated me for it. Then they feared it. Then, slowly, they understood it. Their attempts to restore the old arrangement came in stages. First came anger. Then guilt. Then Carol. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said the boys were struggling. "I know," I answered. "They're exhausted. So was I. They feel abandoned." I looked at her for a long time. "Carol, they were never afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing what I paid for." She lowered her eyes because she knew I was right. 3 months later, Tyler came to the house alone. He looked thinner. Older. The arrogance had been worked out of his face one unpaid bill at a time. "I took advantage of you," he said. There was no excuse attached. No request for money. Just the truth. Owen came 2 weeks later. He stood in my garage while I worked and admitted that laughing at me had been one of the ugliest things he had ever done. "You were there every time we needed someone," he said. "We treated that like it meant nothing." I forgave them. But forgiveness did not mean returning to the old life. I never became their bailout fund again. They paid their own rent, their own debts, their own repairs. When they asked me for advice, I gave it. When they needed encouragement, I offered it. But the money stopped. And strangely, that was when our relationship finally became real. Without cash between us, they had to decide whether they valued me as a man or merely as a resource. Respect came slowly, awkwardly, but it came honestly. I spent years believing that sacrifice automatically created love. It does not. Sometimes constant rescue only teaches people that your suffering is normal and their irresponsibility is harmless. I did not destroy my family when I stopped paying. I stopped financing the disrespect that was already destroying it. So tell me, was I wrong to let two grown men struggle after years of carrying them? Or was that the first truly fatherly thing I ever did? Forgiveness did not erase what had happened. It only gave us somewhere new to begin. For the first few weeks after Tyler and Owen apologized, they were careful around me. Their messages became formal. Their visits felt rehearsed. They thanked me for coffee, for dinner, even for opening the front door, as though politeness could somehow repay years of contempt. I could see the shame in them. I could also see the fear. They still did not know whether my forgiveness was permanent, or whether one wrong word would send me back into silence. Perhaps they expected punishment. Perhaps they believed I was waiting for another opportunity to remind them of the nights they had laughed at me. I never did. I did not need to. Life had already repeated their words back to them in a language they finally understood. Tyler's warehouse shifts began at 6 in the evening and ended after sunrise. He would come home with swollen hands and dust in the seams of his clothes. Owen drove deliveries through rain, snow, and neighborhoods where porch lights had gone dark long before he arrived. They learned what exhaustion felt like when no one was standing behind them with an open wallet. And I watched. Not with pleasure. That is the part people may not believe. There was no satisfaction in seeing them struggle. These were still Carol's sons. I had watched them celebrate promotions, survive heartbreaks, and stumble through the confusion of becoming men. Their pain did not make me happy. But rescuing them would have made everything meaningless. One Sunday, Carol asked me whether I thought they had suffered enough. We were sitting at the breakfast table. Morning light stretched across the wood between us, illuminating every scratch left by years of family meals. Suffering was never the point, I told her. Then what was? Responsibility. She looked toward the hallway, making certain we were alone. They understand now. Maybe. Her expression tightened. What else do they have to prove? I set down my coffee. That they can respect me when they don't need something. The truth silenced her. For years, every warm conversation with her sons had ended in a request. Every compliment had been followed by an amount. Every sudden interest in my life had arrived just before another financial emergency. I needed to know whether anything remained when money was removed. That answer came slowly. Tyler began calling me after work. At first, he spoke only about practical things, taxes, overtime, a strange noise in his car. Then one evening he asked how my day had been. I almost did not know how to answer. He had never asked before. Owen started visiting on Saturdays. He brought his own groceries and helped me repair the fence behind the house. He did not mention his debts. He did not hint at needing help. We worked side by side in silence. It was the first honest silence we had ever shared. Months passed. Their lives did not collapse. In fact, they became more stable. Tyler created a budget and paid down the balance that had haunted him for years. Owen traded his expensive car for an older model he could actually afford. They stopped pretending that appearances were worth more than peace. But Carol struggled with the change. She had spent so long protecting them from discomfort that their independence felt like rejection. Whenever Tyler missed dinner because of work, she blamed me. Whenever Owen said he could not afford a holiday, she stared at me as though I were withholding food from a starving child. One night, she finally said what had been growing inside her. "You could make all of this easier." I looked at her across our bedroom. "I could. Then why won't you?" "Because easy is what ruined them." She turned away, but not before I saw anger flash across her face. That was when I understood that Tyler and Owen were not the only ones who had depended on my weakness. Carol had too. My money had allowed her to avoid hard conversations with her sons. Every time they failed, she sent them to me. Every time I paid, she remained a loving mother while I became the silent provider. I carried the cost. She kept their affection. Once I stopped paying, she had to watch them struggle. She had to hear their frustration without handing it to me like another invoice. And she resented me for it. The realization hurt more than I expected. I had believed we were partners. Instead, I began to wonder whether she had married a man or recruited a solution. I asked her directly, "Did you ever tell them to stop asking me for money?" She hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. "They were going through difficult times," she finally said. "For 6 years? They needed help. They needed boundaries. They needed family." I felt something inside me go cold. I was family when the bills arrived. Was I family when they laughed in my face? Carol's eyes filled with tears, but I did not look away. She had been silent that night. Now her silence returned. The boys had apologized. They had changed. But my wife still could not admit that she had helped create the men they had become. That was the second betrayal. Quieter than the first. Deeper too. Because contempt from two young men could be blamed on immaturity. But Carol had watched me drain myself for her children and called it love. Maybe she believed it. Maybe I had believed it too. So I drew another boundary. I separated our finances. I canceled the joint card Tyler and Owen had once used for emergencies. I placed my savings into an account only I controlled. Carol called it distrust. I called it memory. Our marriage survived, but it changed. There were no more hidden transfers, no promises made with my money, no rescues arranged behind my back. For the first time, everyone in that family understood that my generosity belonged to me. It was not an inheritance. It was not an obligation. It was a choice. And choices disappear when respect does. Tyler and Owen eventually became men I could admire. Carol and I learned to live with the scar her silence had left. Some wounds close, but they still ache when the weather changes. I forgave all three of them. But I never forgot who they became when they believed my patience had no limit. So tell me, can trust truly be rebuilt after a family learns to value the man only when his money stops coming? The strange thing about boundaries is that people often mistake them for revenge. They looked at me as though I had become someone cold, someone selfish, someone who had suddenly forgotten what family meant. But they never asked how many nights I had stayed awake wondering whether another transfer would finally be the last one. They never saw the spreadsheet where I quietly moved money from my retirement savings just to keep Tyler from being evicted or Owen from drowning in another month of debt. They only noticed the day the money stopped. Everything before that had become invisible. A month after we separated our finances, Carol invited both boys over for Sunday dinner. She hoped it would feel like old times. I knew it never could. The food was good. The conversation was careful. Nobody mentioned money. That alone told me how much had changed. Tyler talked about overtime at the warehouse. Owen described a certification course he had started paying for himself. I listened more than I spoke. Then Tyler looked at me. "I finally understand something," he said quietly. Nobody interrupted him. "I always thought you had plenty of money. Every time we asked, you found a way to help. I figured another $1,000 didn't really matter to you." I smiled without humor. "It always mattered." His face tightened. "I never thought about what you gave up. You didn't have to," I answered. "I made sure you never saw it." That confession settled over the table like heavy rain. For years I had protected them from the truth. They never knew about the vacations Carol and I canceled because one of them had another emergency. They never knew about the overtime shifts I accepted while telling them I simply enjoyed staying busy. They never knew that I postponed replacing my own aging truck because Tyler needed rent and Owen needed another repair. Every rescue had come with a cost. I had simply chosen to hide the receipt. Owen lowered his eyes. I used to joke with my friends that you were basically an ATM. Carol closed her eyes. I know, Owen whispered. I hate admitting that now. I looked at him for several seconds. What changed? He answered without hesitation. The first paycheck that disappeared before the month was over. He laughed once. There was no joy in it. I kept asking myself where all my money went. Then I remembered how many times you fixed that exact problem for me. Nobody spoke after that. There was nothing left to explain. Experience had taught them what lectures never could. After dinner, Tyler stayed behind while Carol and Owen cleaned the kitchen. He stood beside me on the back porch, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. I blamed you, he admitted. I know. I told everyone you were trying to control us. And now? He rubbed the back of his neck. Now I think you were trying to teach us something our real dad never did. Those words stayed with me long after he drove away. For years I had refused to compete with their biological father. I believed that was the respectful thing to do. But respect only works when everyone practices it. Their father had given them freedom without responsibility. I had given them responsibility without demanding recognition. Neither approach had been enough. Real fatherhood, I realized, lives somewhere between kindness and accountability. Later that week, Carol found me organizing old financial records in my office. She picked up one folder. Inside were bank statements going back almost 7 years. Transfer after transfer. Payment after payment. Emergency after emergency. She slowly turned the pages. I didn't know it was this much. You never asked? Tears filled her eyes. I thought it was manageable. It was. I paused. Until it wasn't. She sat across from me in silence. For the first time since we married, there was no defense of the boys. No explanation. No excuse. Only regret. I failed you, she whispered. The words were simple. They were also the hardest words she had ever spoken to me. I reached across the desk and covered her hand with mine. You failed all of us. She nodded. I kept protecting them. Yes. And every time I did, I asked you to carry what I should have made them carry. Yes. Neither of us cried. Some conversations become too honest for tears. Weeks turned into months. The emergency phone calls disappeared. Birthdays became about celebrating instead of solving financial disasters. When Tyler bought a used car with cash he had saved himself, he smiled with a pride I had never seen before. When Owen paid off his final credit card, he framed the confirmation email as a joke. I wanted proof I actually grew up. We all laughed. It was the first laughter in years that carried no bitterness. Looking back, I understand something I missed for far too long. Love is generous. Respect is earned. But enabling someone to avoid the consequences of every bad decision is neither love nor respect. It is surrender disguised as kindness. I surrendered for years because I believed sacrifice alone could hold the family together. I was wrong. Families survive because everyone carries part of the weight. The day I stopped carrying all of it was the day the rest of them finally learned how strong they could become. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not another rescue. Sometimes it is the dignity of facing life on their own. So tell me honestly, would you have continued paying for peace, or would you have risked losing your family to save their future? People often believe the story ends with an apology. It does not. An apology opens a door, but someone still has to walk through it. The months that followed became a quiet test. No one announced it. No one even spoke about it. Yet every conversation, every visit, every family dinner carried the same unspoken question. Had we really changed? The first sign came just before Christmas. In previous years, Tyler and Owen always arrived with long wish lists disguised as casual conversations. One needed help replacing furniture. The other wanted assistance with holiday travel. Somehow every celebration ended with another expense finding its way onto my shoulders. That year was different. Tyler walked into the house carrying wrapped presents he had paid for himself. "They're not expensive," he said with an embarrassed smile. "But they're ours." Owen nodded. "We wanted to do this without asking anyone for money." Carol looked at me. I could see tears forming before she turned away toward the kitchen. She understood exactly why that moment mattered. Not because of the gifts. Because of the effort behind them. Later that evening, Tyler handed me a small package. Inside was an old leather notebook. "I know you like writing things down instead of using your phone." I ran my fingers across the cover. It could not have cost much. It meant more than the expensive watches and gadgets they had once expected me to buy for them. For the first time, they had given instead of taken. That simple change carried more weight than any apology. A few weeks later, Owen called me while driving home from work. "I almost called you yesterday." "Why?" "My alternator failed." I smiled to myself. "What happened?" I remembered what you'd probably say. "What was that?" "Figure out your options before asking someone else to solve your problem." "So what did you do?" I borrowed tools from a coworker, watched 3 repair videos, bought a rebuilt alternator, and fixed it myself. "Were you successful?" "It took 6 hours." He laughed. My hands still hurt. But I did it." His voice carried something I had never heard before. Confidence. Not the loud confidence that comes from believing someone else will rescue you. The quiet confidence that comes from surviving without rescue. When we hung up, I sat alone in my office for several minutes. I realized I was prouder of that phone call than I would have been if I had simply transferred another $1,000. Money solves immediate problems. Responsibility changes lives. Spring arrived, and with it came another unexpected conversation. Carol found a box while cleaning the attic. Inside were old bank records, birthday cards, and photographs from our first years together. We spread everything across the dining room table. "There we are," she whispered, pointing at a picture taken shortly after our wedding. Tyler and Owen stood beside us. Both boys looked uncomfortable. "I remember that day," Tyler said. "I don't," Owen admitted. "I do," I answered quietly. "It was the day I promised myself I'd treat both of you like family." Silence settled over the room. Then Tyler reached for one of the envelopes. It contained a canceled check. His name was written across the bottom. "So many of these," he murmured. "There were hundreds," I replied. He stared at the amount. "I forgot all about this." I didn't. Not because I wanted credit. Because every payment represented another promise I had made to keep our family together. Promises leave memories. Even after the money disappears. That afternoon, Tyler surprised me. "I'd like to pay something back." I shook my head immediately. "No. Please. No. Even a little." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "If you truly want to repay me, don't waste the life those sacrifices helped protect." He lowered his eyes. "I can do that." "I know." That answer was enough. Some debts cannot be measured in dollars. Trying to repay them with money only misses the point. Months later, we gathered for another family dinner. The atmosphere felt lighter than it had in years. There were jokes. Stories. Laughter that arrived naturally instead of forcing itself into uncomfortable silence. At one point, Carol stood to refill everyone's drinks. She looked around the table before speaking. "I've been thinking about something." We waited. "I spent years believing love meant protecting my sons from failure." She smiled sadly. "But protecting them from consequences only delayed the men they were supposed to become." Nobody argued. Nobody needed to. The evidence sat around that table. 2 independent men. 1 humbled mother. One stepfather who had finally learned that saying no can sometimes become the greatest act of love. I no longer worried about late-night phone calls asking for money. Instead, Tyler called to share promotions. Owen called to ask for advice. Neither conversation ended with a bank transfer. Both ended with gratitude. That was all I had ever wanted. Respect did not arrive because I demanded it. It arrived because everyone finally understood its value. The strange thing is that I lost the role they expected me to play. The endless rescuer. The dependable wallet. The silent provider. In losing that role, I finally gained something infinitely more valuable. A real place in the family. Not because of what I paid. Because of who I became when I stopped paying. So tell me, how many families mistake endless sacrifice for love until someone finally has the courage to say enough?